You ever sit at a dinner table so polished, so carefully arranged, that it feels less like a family meal and more like a staged performance? That's what Sunday nights have always been like in my house. My parents treat dinner like a sacred ritual, and for as long as I can remember, I've played my role in that little theater silently, politely, like background music no one really listens to. The table gleams under the chandelier, every surface screaming of wealth and tradition. Crystal goblets sparkle with faint reflections of the light, porcelain dishes sit in perfect symmetry, and heavy silver cutlery rests on folded napkins like soldiers awaiting command. To anyone else, it would look like the picture of refinement, but to me, it feels like a trap one I've been walking into every week of my life. My name is Clara Mitchell, the eldest daughter in the Mitchell family. Though you wouldn't know it if you sat across from us. See, my parents' world doesn't revolve around me. No, it revolves around my younger sister, Sophia, their golden child, their star, the one who can do no wrong. I sit at my usual place. Second chair to the right of my father, not too close, not too far. Close enough to serve the dishes if my mother asks, but far enough that no one ever really looks me in the eye. I twirl the stem of my glass, listening to the faint sound of crystal against my nail. The roast beef sits untouched on my plate, steaming gently, almost taunting me. Across the table my father checks his watch, as if the minutes of his time are too precious to waste. Sophia should be here by now, he mutters. His voice carries a note of expectation, the kind usually reserved for royalty. You know your sister, my mother replies, adjusting the napkins with surgical precision. She moves on her own schedule. Her words carry warmth, but her eyes, those sharp, assessing eyes, flick toward me, as if to remind me, don't you dare comment, Clara. I swallow hard, keeping my face neutral. I've learned the art of silence here. It's easier than fighting, easier than reminding them I exist. Every Sunday since I started my job at the publishing house, I've shown up for this dinner. Dressed neatly, polite as ever, praying for some shift in the atmosphere. Maybe tonight, I've thought so many times, they'll see me, not just as Sophia's older sister but as myself. But the truth? I could win a Nobel Prize and still end up as a footnote to Sophia's existence. The front door creaks open, and then it happens the moment everything always tilts. The sound of heels clicking across the hardwood floor, light, rhythmic, like music designed to announce her arrival. Sophia sweeps in, hair perfectly tousled from the evening breeze. Lips painted with just the right shade of confidence. She doesn't just walk into a room, she conquers it. Sorry I'm late. She laughs, her voice carrying that careless charm that makes people forgive her before she even finishes her excuse. She tosses her purse onto the sideboard with a casual flick, nearly toppling my mother's prized glass vase. No one scolds her. No one ever does. I force a smile, though my stomach twists. There she is, my sister, the golden one, and here I am, sitting quietly like a shadow, while the spotlight follows her every step. My father's face transforms the second he sees her. His stern, measured expression melts into a smile. Did the interview go well? Seemed to, Sophia answers, sliding into her chair without missing a beat. She glances at me, not really seeing me, just acknowledging my presence, like one notices a chair or a lamp. Then, with a small smirk, she turns her attention back to the table. The manager said I had excellent qualifications. Of course you did, my mother chimes in, serving her a portion that looks twice the size of mine. We're just glad you had reliable transportation today. The air thickens, my grip on the fork tightens. Reliable transportation. The phrase repeats in my head like a cruel joke. Because earlier that day, I had gone to grab my car keys only to find them missing. My silver sedan, the one I bought with my own savings, the one I drive to work every single day, was gone. I tore apart my apartment looking for the keys, thinking maybe I'd misplaced them, but no, deep down, I knew. And here Sophia sits, Smiling sweetly, twirling her fork as if nothing happened, I set my fork down carefully, deliberately, letting the soft clink of silver against china cut through the conversation. My voice is calm, measured but heavy with the weight of something long suppressed. Sophia, did you take my car without asking me? The question hangs in the air. Sophia doesn't flinch. She simply rolls her eyes, twirling the key ring on her finger, the one with the distinctive leather tag I bought from a small shop downtown. My key ring, my car. My stomach drops, but my face remains calm. Oh, please, she says lightly, tossing the keys beside her glass of water as if they mean nothing. It was just sitting in your garage anyway. That's not an answer, I reply, my tone sharper this time. My father's face hardens instantly. Family helps family, Clara. Your sister needed to make a good impression today. That's more important than your little inconveniences. There it is, the knife to the gut. My life, my independence, my boundaries all reduced to little inconveniences. My mother gives me that familiar smile, the one that pretends to soothe while cutting me deeper. Honestly, darling, it's not as if you were using it. I feel it then, the anger. Not the kind that erupts and fades, but the slow-burning fire that's been waiting in the shadows, biding its time. For years I've swallowed it down, buried it beneath polite smiles and quiet compliance. But tonight, as the chandelier light glitters above us and Sophia smirks across the table, I feel that fire rise. And though no one at the table notices, I realize something vital. This dinner, this ritual, this whole charade, it isn't about family. It never was. It's about hierarchy, control, and favoritism. And I've been playing the role of the overlooked daughter long enough. The air shifted the moment Sophia walked in, late, as always, carefree as always, confidence clinging to her like a perfume that filled the whole dining room. She didn't apologize in any way that mattered, just a little laugh, a careless shrug, and suddenly the tension of her absence dissolved into admiration. Her hair was swept back as if the evening breeze had styled it perfectly for her. She wasn't dressed extravagantly, but somehow, the way she carried herself made a simple dress look like something worth photographing. That's Sophia. She didn't just enter a room, she commanded it. And in her hand, dangling like a prize, she'd won, were my car keys. At first, I thought maybe my eyes were tricking me. But no, the leather key tag I bought last year, worn smooth from use, swung casually from her fingers. She twirled it once before setting it beside her plate, as though it were nothing more than a decorative trinket. My throat tightened. Hours earlier, I'd torn apart my apartment searching for those keys. I'd thought maybe I was losing my mind, but no, she had them the whole time. She had my car. Interview went well, Sophia announced, sliding into her chair. The manager said I had excellent qualifications. I'm practically guaranteed the position. The word stung. Not because of her success, she could have every job in the city, for all I cared, but because of what it cost me. She had made her first impression by driving across town in my car, without my consent, while I spent the morning late and stranded. You're glowing, my mother beamed at her, spooning a generous portion of roast beef onto her plate, twice the size of mine. We knew you'd do wonderfully. You always do, always. I tried to swallow the bitterness clawing its way up my chest. The glass stem wobbled slightly between my fingers. Finally, I asked, my voice steadier than I expected, Sophia, did you take my car without asking? The table froze for a beat. Sophia smirked. That same smirk that had haunted me since childhood, the one that said rules were for everyone else. She gave the keys a little flick, the metal chimming against the glass like she was ringing a bell for service. Oh, relax, she said lightly. It was just sitting there in your garage. That's not an answer, I shot back. My father's eyes cut to me, cold and sharp. Family helps family, Clara. Your sister needed that car today. That's more important than whatever inconvenience you suffered. There it was, inconvenience. As though hours of panic and rearranging my schedule meant nothing compared to Sophia's job interview. My mother added, voice soft but loaded, honestly, darling, it's not as though you were using it. Let's not make this unpleasant. But it was already unpleasant. It always had been. Sophia smirked into her wine glass. My parents fawned over her like she was spun from gold. And I once again was invisible. Only this time, the fire inside me didn't shrink, it grew, because Sophia hadn't just taken my car. She'd stolen my dignity, paraded it around and been praised for it, and my parents applauded for years. I'd endured this ritual of being overlooked, but tonight, watching Sophia twirl my car keys like a trophy, I understood something. My silence had been their permission, and I was done granting it. The silence after my question didn't last long. Sophia had barely set down my car keys before my father's voice sliced through the air. It was sharp, commanding like a gavel at the end of a trial I hadn't realized I was already losing. Clara, he said, tone heavy with disapproval. Family helps family. Your sister needed the car, that's what matters. The words landed like stones, not just because of what they meant, but because of how casually he spoke them. As though the verdict had always been decided, as though there was no room for my side of the story. My mother chimed in almost immediately, smoothing the edges of his blunt decree with her gentler voice. Darling, don't make this unpleasant. Sophia had something important today. A car sitting idle in your garage shouldn't cause such fuss. I felt my stomach tighten, a knot pulling tighter with every word. This wasn't just about a car, it never was. It was about the pattern, the rhythm of my life in this family. Sophia reached, and they applauded. I resisted, and they scolded. It was the same dance, over and over again, until the steps felt burned into my skin. I glanced at Sophia across the table. She didn't bother to look at me. Her attention was on her plate. On the way the candlelight glowed against the rim of her wine glass. She didn't need to speak. My parents were already speaking for her, already lifting the weight of her choices and dropping it squarely onto my shoulders. You could have called me. I tried, my voice quieter this time though. Firm. If you'd asked, maybe I'd have said yes. But you didn't. You just took it. You can't act like my things don't matter because they're mine. The last words trembled, betraying the anger bubbling under my ribs. But my father only sighed, setting down his fork with deliberate care, as though my protest was exhausting him. You're being dramatic. Sophia had a serious interview. You didn't need the car. End of story. End of story. That was always his favorite phrase. An iron curtain slammed down to stop any chance of rebuttal. He wielded it like a weapon, shutting me out before I could even begin to fight back. My mother gave me a look then, the kind meant to soothe, but that instead burned worse than fire. Clara, honey, it's not as though Sophia meant any harm. She didn't crash the car, did she? And look, she came back safe. We should be proud of her, not bickering over something so small. The word echoed in my chest, bouncing around, until it became unbearable. That's what they thought of me, of my feelings, of the constant, grinding unfairness I'd lived with for years. It was always small when I raised my voice. Always small when Sophia stepped out of line. Always small when the balance tipped in her favor and crushed me beneath it. Sophia leaned back in her chair then, a little smirk tugging at her lips. She didn't even need to join the argument. My parents were doing her work for her. She didn't have to defend herself, not when they'd already declared her innocent and me unreasonable. For a moment, I thought about pushing harder, about forcing them to see. My hands clenched under the table, nails biting into my palms, every nerve in my body screaming to speak, to make them listen. But then I caught sight of their faces, my father's cold impatience, my mother's condescending sweetness, Sophia's quiet triumph, and I realized something chilling. They had no intention of listening. This wasn't a debate I could win. It never had been. I could pour my heart out on the table, bleed every word I'd swallowed for years, and it still wouldn't matter. they'd still crown Sophia the golden child, the perfect daughter, the one worth sacrificing everything for. And me, I was the footnote, the inconvenience, the shadow. So instead, I swallowed the lump in my throat and looked down at my plate, pretending to care about the food I couldn't taste. My silence was the only armor I had left, thin though it was, but, deep inside, something was shifting because silence wasn't enough anymore. Not tonight. They thought dismissing me was the end of the story, but I was starting to understand it was only the beginning. The rest of dinner unfolded like an echo chamber. Plates clinked, wine poured, and laughter rose around me, but I wasn't truly there, not anymore. My body sat at the table, head bowed over and touched food, but my mind had slipped somewhere else, somewhere deeper, darker, sharper. Because in that moment, watching Sophia bask in effortless grace while my parents excused, defended, justified, I understood something I had ignored for far too long. This wasn't about tonight. This wasn't about the car. This was about every night, every year, every single time I had been told to shrink while Sophia was encouraged to shine. And the memories came flooding back. I was 16 again, standing in front of the bulletin board at school, heart pounding. As I read the list of students selected for the debate team, my name was there, Clara Phillips. A thrill rushed through me. It was something I had worked for, practiced for, dreamed about, but when I brought the paper home, practically glowing with pride, my father barely looked up from his newspaper. "That's nice, Clara," he said flatly before turning to Sophia. "Did you sign up for piano auditions? They'd be lucky to have you." In one breath, my triumph evaporated. Then came college. I had worked tirelessly, balancing part-time jobs with scholarships to get into a program I loved. But when an internship offer arrived, one that could have changed everything, I turned it down. Not because I wanted to, but because Sophia needed me. She had been accepted to a summer program across the country, and my parents couldn't handle the logistics alone. "Clara, you're better at organizing," my mother had said, hand on my shoulder. "You can afford to wait. Sophia only gets opportunities like this once in a lifetime." So I waited. And I watched my opportunity disappear. And then, last year, I had landed a promotion. A position I'd earned after months of putting in extra hours, sacrificing weekends, proving myself again and again. That night, when I shared the news at dinner, I had expected just once to see pride light up their eyes. Instead, my father's response had been almost mechanical. "Good, but have you heard what Sophia's doing now? She's being considered for a management position already. Isn't that wonderful?" I smiled then, because what else was there to do? But deep inside, a small, fragile part of me cracked. Sitting at the dinner table now, the memories layered themselves over the present moment like stacked glass, sharp edges cutting into me with every recollection. The truth was undeniable. My life had been one long series of sacrifices. I had bent myself into silence, into invisibility, into the supporting role in someone else's story. And Sophia, carefree, charming, thoughtless Sophia, had walked through doors I held open for her, had danced under spotlights I helped angle, had taken pieces of me without even noticing. But the real wound wasn't hers. It was theirs. My parents, the people who should have seen me, protected me, lifted me. Instead, they had raised me to believe that I was less, not because I was, but because Sophia was more in their eyes. They had mistaken favoritism for love, excuses for support, indulgence for parenting, and I had mistaken their silence for truth. But not anymore. As I sat there, candlelight flickering across crystal and china, something inside me shifted. The years of swallowed words, buried anger, and quiet compliance burned away, leaving behind something sharper, steadier. I wasn't just hurt anymore, I was awake. I finally saw the pattern for what it was. Not isolated slights, not bad luck, not me being too sensitive. No, it was favoritism. It was enabling. It was a deliberate blindness that had cost me chances, dreams, and dignity, and suddenly, I wasn't sad, I was angry, but even deeper than the anger was a new, unfamiliar feeling, something stronger. Something alive, determination. Because if there was one thing this night had taught me, it was this: I couldn't wait for them to change. They wouldn't. I had to change. I had to claim my voice, my power, my story. Sophia might have walked in late, carefree, holding my car keys like a trophy. My parents might have brushed me aside like I was being petty. But this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of something I had never dared to consider before. Revenge, maybe, justice, definitely. At the very least, I would no longer be their afterthought. I picked up my fork then, not to eat, but to steady my hand. My parents' laughter hummed in the background. Sophia's smug smile still painted across her face, but I wasn't the same Clara who had walked into this dinner. They didn't notice the shift. Not yet, but they would. Oh, they would, because tonight, at this table, in the glow of crystal and candlelight, I realized something vital. If I couldn't win their love, I would win their respect. And if I couldn't have that, I would take back every ounce of power they'd stolen from me. Piece by piece. No matter the cost. The moment I slid my phone from the pocket of my blazer, my stomach turned into a coil of steel. 6 notifications. 6 little explosions, each more infuriating than the last. I had thought the damage had been done. Sophia holding my car keys, my parents' deafening silence, their unwavering defense of her thoughtlessness. But now, as the screen lit up in my hand, the truth hit like ice water. There it was. Sophia, leaning against my midnight blue sedan, the one I had worked months to buy, the one that smelled of new leather and independence, smiling like the world had handed her everything she had ever wanted. The caption was casual, mocking in its normalcy. Thanks Mom and Dad for the amazing gift. #blessed, #family love, double quotes, gift. Mine. The phone slipped slightly in my grip, my thumb hovering over the screen as my vision sharpened. Every single friend, every acquaintance who had liked the post, every comment praising the generosity of my supportive parents, was a reminder that nothing had changed. They saw it all, but they saw it wrong. I placed the phone on the table slowly, deliberately, the light from the crystal chandelier glinting off its smooth surface. My parents' eyes, which had previously been trained to gloss over me, flickered toward it. My father leaned forward, a practiced frown already forming on his forehead, while my mother adjusted her napkin with that same perfect, poised motion. We need to talk about boundaries, I said, my voice steady but resonating with the tension I had been holding in for years. For a second, silence blanketed the room, then, predictably, it cracked. It's just a social media post, Clara, my father said, waving a hand in the air, as if I had complained about a gust of wind. Don't overreact. Sophia just wants to feel good about herself, like every other person her age. My mother added her own seasoning of dismissal. Oh, really, darling, is this so terrible? Her voice was light, almost sing-song, but the underlying message was clear. My feelings didn't matter, but that lightness couldn't reach me. Not tonight. I had spent too long shrinking, too long pretending that compromise, endurance, and polite silence were enough. No more. I stood up, letting the chair scrape lightly against the polished floor. The sound echoed louder than it should have, like a drumbeat marking the end of one era and the beginning of another. Show me the scratch, I said, voice calm, surgical even. My parents exchanged quick glances. My father opened his mouth, closed it, and then shrugged as if to suggest this wasn't worth the effort. Sophia rolled her eyes, twirling her hair and smirking like I was overreacting to a minor inconvenience. But I knew better. We walked outside, to the driveway where the light fell harshly on the car, and there it was, the jagged line along the passenger door, a red smear against the midnight blue, unmistakable in its brutality. My chest tightened. This wasn't a mere accident. This was carelessness, This was entitlement. This was another lesson in how little my autonomy mattered in my own family. Did you sideswipe a fire hydrant? I asked, careful to keep the edge out of my voice, to maintain a controlled fury. Sophia shrugged. Insurance will cover it. Does it matter? Her casual disregard sliced deeper than the scratch. Because it wasn't just the car, it was me. My hard work, my effort, my carefully constructed life being treated as a prop for someone else's amusement. Inside, the tension climbed. Double quotes Clara, my mother said, her tone soft but dismissive. She didn't mean anything by it. You've always been so sensitive. Can't you just let it go? I could feel something ancient, something long buried rising in me, a mixture of rage, exhaustion, and finally, clarity. Let it go. No. Every post Sophia had made, every gleaming smile plastered across social media, every casual theft of my effort, each had been a thread in a tapestry woven over decades, and finally, I could see the pattern clearly. I wasn't just angry about a car anymore, I was angry about a lifetime of having my value dismissed, my victories minimized, my autonomy stripped away in the name of family, and that anger was no longer quiet. I swallowed, steadying my hands, and addressed them all at once. You know, it's not about the car, I said. The words spilled out deliberately, calmly measured. It's about the fact that my hard work, my decisions, my achievements are not respected in this house. For years I've bent, sacrificed, and stayed silent so that Sophia could take center stage. And tonight, that pattern has to end. My father opened his mouth. My mother started to interject. Sophia smirked, as if I was performing a temper tantrum, but I held up a hand, a silent command for attention. No, listen, I've realized something important. I cannot control how you act, and I cannot change your favoritism, your enabling, but I can control what I allow in my life. I can reclaim the space, the respect, and the recognition that is mine. And I will. The room shifted, I could see it. In their eyes a faint crack in the armor of certainty, a flicker of surprise, an unspoken acknowledgement that this was no longer the compliant daughter they had raised. The phone lay on the table like a weapon or a challenge, its glow reflecting the chandeliers above, and in that moment, I realized that real control wasn't about shouting, wasn't about punishment, wasn't about getting back at Sophia in a childish way. It was about reclaiming my narrative. My life, my hard-earned victories. I didn't need them to admit wrongdoing. I didn't need apologies. I didn't even need Sophia to change. What I needed was my own power, and that began with setting boundaries that could not be ignored, with actions that could not be dismissed, with a quiet, unstoppable determination that my work, my property, my life would no longer be collateral in someone else's story. For the first time in decades, I felt the weight of years lift, the anger transformed into clarity, the rage into strategy. I would not wait for justice, I would create it. And tonight, the Instagram post, the scratched car, the dismissive parents, they were no longer symptoms of a family dynamic I had to endure. They were catalysts. Catalysts for the life I had always deserved but never allowed myself to claim. The breaking point wasn't a dramatic shout, a slammed door, or a public argument. It was the quiet, unyielding realization that my life, my choices, my success, and my possessions were mine, and I would not allow them to be trivialized, stolen, or used as tools to prop up someone else's ego ever again. And in that realization, I found something exhilarating. Freedom not in rebellion for rebellion's sake, but in deliberate, thoughtful reclamation of my autonomy. I would act, I would plan, I would reclaim. And Sophia, my parents, they would finally understand that Clara Phillips was no longer just a supporting character in their story. I was the narrator now, and this time, I would write the ending. The next morning, sunlight spilled across my apartment in warm, lazy strips. I barely noticed it. My mind was elsewhere, laser-focused, a plan forming with the precision of the contracts I'd spent years perfecting. Today would be different today. I would no longer exist in the shadows of Sophia's entitlement or my parents' dismissive approval. I had decided, if they refused to respect my boundaries, I would create boundaries so absolute they could not ignore them. And the first step was simple, yet powerful. The car dotted had been mine in every sense that mattered, purchased with my sweat, my overtime, my late nights, but in my family's eyes, it was nothing more than another prop for Sophia's performance. Enough. I called my company attorney, Walter, a composed man with the uncanny ability to take chaos and convert it into precise legal maneuvering. By the time he arrived, I had a folder ready, stacked with forms, signatures, and instructions. Everything had been meticulously prepared the night before. After pacing the apartment for what felt like hours, letting my rage transform into calculated action, Walter arrived promptly. Briefcase in hand, his expression neutral, though I could sense the curiosity behind the mask. "So this is it," he said, setting his case on the coffee table. "You're ready to transfer ownership?" I nodded. "I'm done negotiating. I'm done explaining. The car is going to be company property. Full and final. Effective immediately." He raised an eyebrow. "You know this is final, right? Once the paperwork is signed, it's out of personal reach entirely." "Exactly," I replied, the words tasting sweet. "That's the point." For hours we worked together, moving through the paperwork with deliberate care. Each signature, each initial, each checkbox was a small victory as Walter confirmed the transfer. My chest expanded with a strange, almost dizzying sense of liberation. The car that had been a source of stress, of theft, of dismissal, was now protected legally, undeniably, untouchable by Sophia or anyone else. No one would be able to claim it as a gift to her. No one would dismiss my efforts or treat my hard-earned success as collateral. For the first time in years, the boundaries I set were not suggestions, they were ironclad. By late afternoon, the transfer was complete. The car was officially company property, fully insured under corporate policy, and assigned for professional use only. I stood in the underground parking garage, tracing my fingers along the sleek midnight blue hood, feeling its cool surface beneath my fingertips. This wasn't revenge in the petty sense. It wasn't about embarrassment or punishment. It was a reclamation of respect, a declaration that my work, my possessions, and my life would no longer be trivialized. I thought about Sophia, imagining the flustered realization she would have when she returned home, the smirk she had worn at dinner, the casual twirl of my keys, the Instagram post flashing across my screen. They were all memories now, inert reminders of what had been possible when I let people walk over me. But they no longer held power. The transformation wasn't just external. It was inside me. I realized that boundaries weren't merely lines drawn in the sand, they were the architecture of self-respect, the scaffolding of independence. Each document signed, each decision asserted, reinforced not only the legality of the act but the permanence of the message. Clara Phillips was no longer a secondary character in her own life. By evening, I sat in my apartment, reflecting on the day's events. Walter had left hours ago, leaving me with a folder labeled Corporate Asset Transfer, completed. I traced my finger along the edge of the folder, imagining it as a shield against entitlement, dismissal, and family-enabled chaos. I felt the weight of power in a new way, not in dominance, not in aggression, but in clarity. For years, I had internalized my family's behavior, the comparisons, the diminishment, the favoritism toward Sophia, but today, I had externalized the solution. Today, action replaced resentment. The car was a symbol, yes, but more than that, it was a fortress, legal, tangible, unassailable. It was the embodiment of boundaries enforced with authority, not begging, not hoping, not pleading. Later that night, I poured a glass of wine, balancing it carefully in one hand as I scrolled through my phone. Every notification felt lighter, now less venomous. The Instagram post from Sophia, the teasing messages from friends who didn't know the whole story, all of it had lost its sting. The emotional grip that had constricted my chest during dinner, during flashbacks of years spent sacrificing while she coasted, had loosened. I realized then that action, when rooted in clarity and justice, has a way of healing. It doesn't erase the past, but it removes its power. The anger that had simmered for months, the resentment that had quietly gnawed at my confidence, was now transformed into something active, productive, and undeniably mine. For the first time in decades, I felt free to navigate my own achievements without apology, free to assert my right to be respected, free to live without the constant comparison. Without the looming shadow of Sophia's effortless charm, I envisioned my next interactions with my parents, their confusion, perhaps even frustration, at the impossibility of reclaiming what I had legally secured. For the first time, I understood the subtle beauty of this act. It was a boundary so absolute that their habitual dismissal no longer mattered. The rules of engagement had changed, and the game was no longer theirs to control. Even Sophia's smug confidence could not pierce this new reality. She would learn, if she hadn't already, that boundaries backed by deliberate action are not negotiable. Respect is not given, it is reinforced by consequence and clarity. I poured another glass of wine, savoring the warmth it spread, but more importantly, savoring the mental clarity that came with decisive action. The car, now a corporate asset, was a tangible reminder of what can be accomplished when you stop waiting for others to recognize your value and start asserting it yourself. That night, as the city lights flickered outside my window, I allowed myself a rare smile. The car was safe, my boundaries were intact, my autonomy, long challenged and minimized, was affirmed, and I knew, without a doubt, that this was only the beginning. The act itself, seemingly simple, a legal transfer of ownership, carried the weight of years of frustration, of comparisons, of invisibility. It was not revenge in the traditional sense, but it was far more satisfying. It was protection, empowerment, and a declaration of self-worth. I leaned back in my chair, glass in hand, and let the quiet pride settle in. For years, I had been reacting, enduring, bending, and excusing. Now, I was initiating, protecting, and asserting. The car was no longer just a vehicle, it was a symbol of the life I intended to live, on my terms, unshakable and undeniably mine. And for the first time, I realized that the most effective revenge is not humiliation or spite, it's the reclaiming of your own and power and ensuring no one can ever take it away again. The days after the transfer were quiet, almost eerily so. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the familiar tension creeping into my chest the moment I stepped into the house, or the knot of anxiety forming when my phone buzzed with a message from Sophia or my parents. It was as if a weight I hadn't fully acknowledged had been lifted, and in its absence, clarity shone through. I watched, from a comfortable distance, how the family adjusted or failed to adjust. Sophia's confidence wavered ever so slightly, though she masked it with the same practiced smile she had worn at countless dinners. My parents, for the first time, seemed unable to default to their habitual patterns. There was hesitation in their glances, an uncertainty I had never witnessed in over 30 years of their orchestrated perfection, and I realized, with quiet satisfaction, that this was the space I had carved out, not through shouting, not through confrontation, but through decisive, principled action. For so long I had measured my worth by their approval, my accomplishments by their recognition. Each promotion, each success, each late-night project had been filtered through the lens of, will they see me? Will they compare me to Sophia? Will they acknowledge the effort? But now, I understood that validation from them was optional, not essential. My achievements, my struggles, and my victories were mine, unmediated, unexamined, and unapologetically authentic. At work, I felt lighter. Tasks that had once been tedious now felt purposeful. Interactions were no longer tainted by the invisible pressure of proving myself. Because I had already proven, to the person that mattered most myself, that I was competent, capable, and deserving. Even colleagues noticed a subtle shift. My presence exuded a calm confidence, one not reliant on the approval of others but grounded in self-assurance. One afternoon, I sat in my corner office, the sun glinting off the edges of my awards and plaques, and I thought about the past months, the dinners, the stolen car, the Instagram posts, the silent comparisons, the rage that had once threatened to consume me. All of it had led to this clarity. A realization that boundaries are not merely protective, they are transformative. By asserting them, I had not only shielded myself from entitlement and dismissal, but I had also begun to rewrite my life story on my own terms. I called my parents that evening, not to argue, not to seek apology, but to set expectations. The car is now a corporate asset, I reminded them gently. It is used solely for professional purposes. I am not asking for approval, I am stating a boundary. There was a pause on the other end. The silence filled with unspoken understanding or perhaps shock. It didn't matter. I felt no need to justify, defend, or explain. For the first time, my decisions stood on their own merit. Later, Sophia called. There was a nervousness in her tone, a crack in the confident facade she had always worn. "Clara, are you serious?" she asked. "Yes," I replied calmly, "and I am done negotiating. The car is for work purposes. Boundaries aren't optional." There was a pause, then an almost imperceptible sigh. She didn't yell. She didn't argue. She didn't flaunt entitlement. She simply processed, as I had hoped she would eventually, that certain lines, once drawn, are immovable. In the weeks that followed, I began to notice changes not only in my family but within myself. There was a sense of liberation I hadn't felt since adulthood began, a freedom that didn't come from possession of a car or approval of others, but from the unshakable knowledge that my life, my work, and my accomplishments were mine alone. I no longer needed to perform, to bend, or to apologize. My self-worth was no longer a reflection of comparison, favoritism, or conditional love. It existed, absolute, independent, and self-determined. Even mundane tasks, preparing dinner, organizing my home office, driving to client meetings, felt imbued with a new sense of autonomy. I smiled at the rearview mirror, the midnight blue corporate sedan gleaming in the sunlight, and felt pride, not for the car itself, but for the principle it represented, respect for my work, for my time, and for my boundaries. The car had become a symbol of transformation, a tangible representation of a life no longer dictated by others' expectations. One Sunday, I returned home for a quiet dinner, this time with no pretense of comparison or approval. The aroma of roasted vegetables filled the air. My parents were present, yet their usual judgments were absent. Sophia was quiet, thoughtful, not because she had been scolded, but because she now understood that her habitual advantages could not override my choices. The silence between us was not tense, it was respectful, a delicate acknowledgement of lines drawn and accepted. I sat relaxed, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of self-possession. I no longer needed to compete, to compare, or to seek validation. I had defined my worth not by parental approval, not by sibling achievements, not by societal expectation, but by independence, by clarity of intention, and by the courage to enforce my own rules. That night, I reflected on the journey, the simmering anger, the careful planning, the legal transfer, and the quiet triumph of boundaries enforced. I realized that revenge, in its most refined form, is not about shaming others or forcing them to grovel. True revenge, the kind that lasts, is about reclaiming power, dignity, and self-respect. It is about transforming rage into action, hurt into clarity, and frustration into freedom. I poured myself a glass of wine and toasted silently to the version of myself that had been invisible, dismissed, and minimized for far too long. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer bound by comparison. She was empowered, clear, and unshakable. And as I looked out over the city skyline, the corporate sedan gleaming in its designated parking space below, I felt the serenity that comes from absolute self-possession. The family dynamics could continue, but they no longer held sway over my inner peace. I had stepped out of the shadow of favoritism, entitlement, and dismissal. I had defined my own narrative. To anyone listening, watching, or reading this story, remember this: your worth is not determined by others. Your achievements, your property, your time, and your boundaries are yours to protect. And when others try to diminish or exploit them, true power lies not in anger alone, but in action clear, deliberate, and unassailable. Thank you for joining me on this journey of reclamation, empowerment, and quiet triumph. If you want more stories of cunning, clever, and satisfying revenge, make sure to subscribe to Revenge Fate.